Okay, I found the captain. He's a corpsicle. Anyone got any bright ideas?
Search the body. You've got experience with that, right?
Cold Fear is one of those games you'd rent for a weekend from Blockbuster back in the day. The game you want had no copies left, but the box art of Cold Fear intrigued you, and there was a copy available. It's a solid, short 7 out of 10 mid-budget game in an era full of them. It has many things going for it. The realistic swing of a ship at sea gives Cold Fear a unique edge. Even then, it's a mechanic the game could have gone far more mileage out of. It makes use of fixed camera angles with the shift to over the shoulder while aiming down a gun. It has a solid story that pulls many tropes and beats from the sci-fi action horror genre. Cold Fear was a game that slipped under the radar, a title that sold little. Released about 2 months after Resident Evil 4 in March of 2005, Cold Fear has always lived in RE4's shadow, and for good reason. It's easy to compare the two with the timing of releases and the over-the-shoulder aiming, something that may have been a coincidence with the timing. While RE4 may have made this approach popular, it wasn't the first to do so. It's also possible that Cold Fear's approach to the camera took inspiration from an earlier version of RE4. It's a game that's grown a small but devoted audience over the years. When you look at the game's release window, it's easy to see why it fell through the cracks. It's one of the more requested games for me to cover on the channel. I haven't played Cold Fear before making this video, only familiar with it through osmosis. Having now played it, I can see why it has its share of devoted fans. You can do better, but you can also do plenty worse. This is a solid 7 out of 10 title from 2005, which makes it far more enjoyable than most modern releases. While the days of renting video games are long gone, it's a perfect Steam sale kind of game. One you could either get around to or add to that never-ending backlog of Steam sale games you've never played. Before diving in, a couple of notes about the PC version of Cold Fear. I didn't have any issues running it with my computer, but I know others have. The joys of running older PC games on modern systems. Always check Steam guides or PC Gaming Wiki beforehand for older titles. There are some Steam guides that offer solutions that seem to work. So if you're curious about trying out or replaying Cold Fear, keep that in mind with the PC version. As well, I'd also like to thank the fellow Boulder Punchers who support the channel through Patreon or a YouTube membership. If you'd like to receive early access to videos, be featured in the credits, receive periodic updates, and my undying gratitude, consider supporting the channel through Patreon or a YouTube membership. With that, onward and upward.
I think you and I are linked, Hansen. We will both make it through this, or neither of us will.
I vote for both.
I don't think you have a choice.
Cold Fear kicks off with a Special Forces team descending onto a Russian whaling ship in the midst of a storm. There are no signs of life on board, at least at first. Unseen and unknown creatures rip apart Alpha Team until no one remains. A man operating the mission behind the scenes sends out a distress signal to anyone in range. The ship USS Ravenswood, under the US Coast Guard, picks up the signal.
Yeah, I hear you.
This is our protagonist, Tom Hansen. He looks like a cross between Dennis Leary and David Bowie. I tried to do those face morphs, which resulted in unsettling results. He has a bit of a smart aleck attitude that Leon Kennedy would approve of.
What is it?
It's a radio. It will let us keep in touch. Just wipe it off first.
This shot of Tom and the crew of the USS Ravenswood gearing up is the mid-2000s in all its glory. Lucky for us, Tom knows Russian. He could read the signage on the ship and understand the Russians on board. We stumble across some Russians who seem to be at wit's end, and open fire on us. So nice of them to stand next to explosive barrels. Nearby is a locked door with a Russian woman spewing profanity on the other side, yelling to be set free. We don't have the code to unlock the door yet. Separated from his fellow crew of the USS Ravenswood, Tom heads out to find them and get to the bottom of what happened aboard. Before getting into the meat and potatoes of Cold Fear, I want to talk about this game's release timeframe. It's very much a title that fell through the cracks. Cold Fear released in March of 2005 on the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and PC. By February of 2006, it sold less than 70,000 units across all platforms in America. Now, poor sales can happen for several reasons. Bad reviews, poor marketing, tough competition. On the marketing front, I'm trying to recall if I heard about this game back in the day, but nothing pops to mind. If you take a gander back to the first third of 2005, it's easy to see that Cold Fear suffered from tough competition. What also saw release in March of 2005? Devil May Cry 3, God of War. Under the Ubisoft umbrella, Cold Fear's publisher came Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. With DMC3 and Chaos Theory, you have some of the very best of their respective genres, if not the best. April would also see releases like Psychonauts, Jade Empire, and SWAT 4. February saw the release of Gran Turismo 4, the best-selling game of 2005. Going back to January of 2005, there's a pretty important title that saw release. You may have heard of it. A little title called Resident Evil 4, a GameCube exclusive until it released for PlayStation 2 later that fall. A title that set a benchmark moving forward. Cold Fear released in its shadow. you couldn't have timed it worse. Going back to the fourth quarter of 2004, you may have what may very well be the greatest quarter in gaming history. Within a 1-month time frame, you had monumental releases like Half-Life 2, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, Metal Gear Solid 3, World of Warcraft, Halo 2. There were so many landmark titles coming out during this time frame. It seems like every other week we'd have a release of a game that has ended up being on those greatest games of all time lists. It was easy for a solid 7 out of 10 budget title like Cold Fear to fall through the cracks. And while it may have slipped through the cracks at the time, the years have been kind to it. Games like Cold Fear had a small but dedicated fanbase and have grown their audience and kept these games alive. Other examples from this time frame include Vampire Bloodlines and Haunting Ground, both of which I've covered on this channel. I'm curious how Cold Fear has done through Steam sales over the years. To me, this later stretch of the 6th generation is the greatest time frame in gaming history. When people were going on about 2023 being one of the best years in gaming, I was like, do you remember this mid-2000s time frame? Looking at my channel demographics, most of you lived through this time. You know what it was like. Not to say 2023 was a bad year for game releases. Tons of great games came out, but let's see how many hold up to the test of time. With that aside, let's get to the meat and potatoes of Cold Fear. When we're not aiming down our sights, Cold Fear takes a more traditional survival horror approach to its camera, one that shifts as we navigate around. The game doesn't use tank controls, at least for our base movement. Beyond a couple of instances, the camera didn't cause any issues with the movement. You can't hit a button to toggle aiming in the default mode. You can move around as opposed to needing to stand still to shoot. This aiming mode behaves more like classic tank controls. While a nice option, I didn't have much use of it. You're much better off using the over-the-shoulder aiming system for a better shot. One that'll look familiar to anyone who's played any game in the last 20 years. And one where you could feel that RE4 connection. Although, hold that thought for now. Throughout our time in Cold Fear, we'll be shooting down Russian mercenaries or the Exocell. The Exocell are parasitic creatures taking over human hosts. They take different shapes and forms. The weapon roster is what you expect from a game like this. Pistols, shotguns, machine guns, assault rifles, grenade launchers. A later game addition is the flamethrower, although you want to be careful where you use it. Using it in outdoor conditions is not the best course of action due to the heavy wind and rain. The weapon of most note is the spear gun, a bit of a misleading name. You shoot at a surface to draw the attention of the Exocell, distracting them for a time. While gunplay handles fine, guns do feel a bit on the weak side in Cold Fear. There's a lack of weight to them. Depending on how a game handles guns, it can be hard to put your finger on why it feels that way, but you know it when you play it. You can feel it with the way of your shots or the lack of it. There can be several reasons to why this is the case. What is it for Cold Fear? Is it the sounds of a gun firing? Well, I've heard better, I've also heard far worse. Not the main culprit. What about the damage they do? A gun can lack weight in a game if enemies are bullet sponges, or guns act like pea shooters. That's not the case in Cold Fear. A well-placed headshot is all you need. How do enemies react to shots? The way body parts fly off or how bodies are flung around is quite satisfying. It's the lack of recoil where the issues arise. Key reason why guns lack weight in Cold Fear. Recoil is next to non-existent. Something that took me a bit to notice. But once I did, I couldn't unsee it, or in this case, not feel it. It's the main culprit of why guns lack a sense of oomph and weight. The why behind it is different than most games that have issues with guns lacking weight. Bullet sponge enemies or a lack of enemy kickback tends to be the main culprit, but not here. This lack of weight continues with the head stomp. We need to remove the host's brain to kill the Exocell. We could do that with our gun or a foot stomp. That or we could stomp on the Exocell when they pop out of a body. Compare this to the foot stomp of Dead Space, one of the most satisfying head stomps in the game. Camera shake, the blood spatter. You could feel that weight. In Cold Fear, it feels like you're squashing a small bug. Continuing with the Resident Evil 4 feel, Cold Fear makes use of QTEs, something that began to re-emerge around this time frame. In the wake of the success of Resident Evil 4, something that became an overused mechanic for a time. They are a rare occurrence in Cold Fear. They only occur as certain enemies close the gap and grab you, situations where you could turn the tide of the battle in an instant. While those elements are below average, Cold Fear does much better with environmental objects. There's plenty to use in the environment to turn the tide against our foes. The usual of what you expect from a game. Explosive barrels, fire extinguishers, electric transformers, valves. I love the notes that inform us of the use of these objects, both as a way to let the player know what they can do and the in-game justification for it. For example, with the valves, there's a note about how the men on board have been playing at shooting the red valves off the fuel pipes. one that resulted in a stream of fire. The thought of bored and, let's be honest, drunk Russian mercenaries firing at valves to pass the time is such a funny thought. It's a small detail that adds a lot of charm to the world of Cold Fear. Something the game didn't need to do. They could have had a tutorial prompt telling us we could use valves or explosive barrels to set off explosions. Instead, they implemented them into the game's story through its notes, a reason for their presence and use. A small detail, but I appreciate when a game does this. On board this Russian whaler, the ship's movement is going to impact our aiming. A bit of a swaying motion while inside the ship. Some areas more than others. It's heading outside on deck into the storm where Cold Fear gets interesting. The sway is far greater, adds a further challenge to lining up our shots due to the ship's movements. It's one of the notable, standout features of Cold Fear. Even then, it's a feature they could have gotten plenty more mileage out of. They could have thrown us into more situations where hanging onto rail is the best choice. I'm sure there are other games that feature this mechanic, but none pop to mind. Need to steady your aim? Grab onto a nearby rail. While you reduce your range of motion, you could steady yourself for a better shot. While you don't need to use the railing, it's a nice option to have. And when the waves come crashing in with great force, when the ship is at too steep of an angle, it will prevent you from being tossed around. It's an area that the devs put plenty of work into, and it shows. The team needed to create around 9 times the animations that you'd find from a third-person title of this era. Character animations that shifted depending on how the ship would sway. They developed a roll editor to achieve a realistic roll movement of a ship at sea during a storm. On the note of animations, the way Tom moves up and down stairs always gives me a chuckle. Something about it is so childlike, for lack of a better term. To see all this effort put into a unique mechanic, only to underutilize it, is disappointing. I can understand that they didn't want to overplay their hand with it. A swaying ship that throws her aim off at all times could have been a frustrating affair. It's a tricky balance, but the end result is one that feels like they played it a bit too safe. Throw us into more tense situations with a rocky ship. Get us out on deck more often. Budding game developers out there, this is mention number 22 in my videos of a mechanic you could look to lift or take inspiration from in your game projects. Like many games of this era, Cold Fear makes use of the RenderWare engine. The RenderWare engine. The game that powered a large chunk of the 6th generation of gaming. An engine with incredible versatility. A godsend for developing titles for the PS2, a system difficult to develop games for. As the 6th gen is my favorite gaming generation, this is more or less my favorite game engine. Of all the lousy things EA has done over the years, from anti-consumer practices to closing studios, EA killing off the RenderWare engine is one of their worst and most overlooked decisions. EA bought Criterion, the creator of the RenderWare engine, in mid-2004. While many games would still use the engine over the next few years, many moved away. And can you blame them with EA owning it? Developers began to look elsewhere. Unreal started its climb to becoming the game engine of choice for studios. Others made their own engine, back when that was far more viable, like Rockstar Games. When I think of RenderWare engine, I think of Rockstar's 6th generation output. They would go on to build their own engine, the Rockstar Advanced Game Engine, or Rage. You know who also moved to Unreal? EA, despite the fact they bought RenderWare. They weren't happy with RenderWare's progress for the next generation. The chief creative officer mentioned they underestimated what Unreal was capable of, and overestimated what RenderWare was doing, more or less killing the engine dead. Thanks as always, EA. There are some great videos on YouTube going into more detail about the RenderWare engine that I'll link to in the description and pinned comment. Some claiming to have worked on the RenderWare engine popped up in the comments. They mentioned that many RenderWare developers would go on to work on Frostbite, EA's current internal engine. Some RenderWare code still exists within Frostbite. There's also videos showing the timeline of popular game engines. A bummer seeing how much RenderWare slows down once you hit the 2007 mark. RenderWare not ending up in the grubby hands of EA is one of those what ifs I like to think about. Would they have been able to compete with the likes of the Unreal Engine? Would they have still remained in the game engine market? What would further versions of the engine look like? You can find the RenderWare Studio visual editor online. There is a modding community, but due to the ownership under EA, you can't release a commercial product. In an ideal world, EA would open source the RenderWare engine and let people do what they wish with it. I'd love to see what enthusiasts can do with it these days. It's possible this could happen, you know, when pigs fly, or Darkside Phil quits playing WWE Champions. But back to Cold Fear. Exploration pulls a few elements from classic survival horror. The ship has interconnected level design, and loops around. We'll unlock shortcuts as we progress. I love the line Tom gives when coming across a locked door. One we'll hear over and over.
The damn thing's stuck.
Beyond this and the fixed camera angles, that's where the classic survival horror elements more or less end. There's no limited inventory and ammo is plentiful, whether from smashing boxes to stocking up at the armory or looting corpses. I thought first the armory would serve as a save room, but no. Cold Fear will ask us at key points if we want to save. I love how Cold Fear plays up the Russian elements present. All the writings on the ship are Russian. Lucky for us, Tom knows Russian. Aiming at the signage on the ship will translate to us what's written. A small little feature that adds further character to Cold Fear. There is no in-game map, but I never found it to be an issue. It's easy to get a feel for the ship's layout through backtracking. There is a map in the game's manual, but it's bare bones and minimal. I've touched upon it here and there, but let's go more into the RE4 Connection. Cold Fear gets a lot of comparisons to Resident Evil 4, and for good reason. The game came out about 2 months after the release of Resident Evil 4. Despite the similarities, I have to wonder if the camera setup of Cold Fear took inspiration from an earlier iteration of Resident Evil 4. RE4 had a rocky development cycle, one that saw several iterations, with one of them turning into Devil May Cry. One iteration shown to the public was the Hallucination version, the name of the 2003 build. This version had fixed camera angles that would switch to over the shoulder for aiming. Capcom showed this build to the public in 2003 before scrapping it, one key reason being technical limitations. It's possible that Darkworks, Cold Fear's developer, saw this version of RE4 and took inspiration from it. Darkworks was an interesting studio. From their existence starting in January of 1998 till September of 2011, they only released 2 games. Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare in 2001, and Cold Fear in 2005. They would work on I Am Alive for several years, before Ubisoft Shanghai would take over the project. Like many smaller studios, they were at the mercy of publishers. They had several cancelled projects or pitches that no publishers took on. One of those cancelled projects was USS Antarctica, a project that went through several iterations. Also known as 1906 An Antarctic Odyssey or Lost Mantis. The studio worked on the game from about 2001 to 2003. They pitched the game as the start of an epic action-adventure trilogy, one mixing fear and romance in a unique sci-fi and fantasy setting. They took heavy inspiration from Jules Verne's Voyage to the Center of the Earth. Who was the game's publisher? Well, that was Capcom. Beyond one trailer, there wasn't much else on the title, as Capcom would pull the plug on it, for reasons I couldn't find on why. From watching the trailer, it wouldn't surprise me if they took elements of this old project and reworked them into Cold Fear. And then there was another stop along the road before Cold Fear. After the cancellation of USS Antarctica, Darkworks collaborated with Namco on a Time Crisis spin-off title. Known as Time Crisis Adventure, Namco dropped the project in 2004. It looks like Ubisoft stepped in, took up publishing rights, and turned this Time Crisis spin-off into its own IP. A product that seems to be a mishmash of ideas from previous cancelled projects. This, of course, is all speculation. Beyond entries on the website Unseen64, I found next to zero information on these titles. I'm sure there's further information buried in old gaming magazines. If anyone has any further information on these titles, please leave a comment. Here's also to hoping a former employee at Darkworks one day stumbles across this video and can provide further insight. So the RE4 Connection, it is possible they took influence from an earlier build, or it's a coincidence with the timing. Besides, it's not like RE4 invented over-the-shoulder aiming. Bringing up the Splinter Cell games again, they had over-the-shoulder aiming a few years before RE4. It's hard to think of many games that have been as influential as Resident Evil 4 since its release. Some indirect, some more direct like the Dead Space series. Cold Fear, well, it seems like they were one of the first, if not the first, in the wake of it. In its case, it seems to be more of the timing, somewhat of a coincidence, although its approach was to offer a more traditional survival horror camera while not aiming, an approach that may have been inspired by the earlier version of RE4. Continuing from where we left off in the story, let's go through Cold Fear's highlights and notable moments. It's not long before Tom finds what remains of his US Coast Guard compatriots. This is where the exocell enter the fold.
Oh, man.
The exocell are who we fight for the vast majority of the game. There are short stretches where we switch back to fighting Russian mercenaries. One thing Cold Fear underutilizes are stretches where we can encounter both. There are less than a handful of rooms where exocells are fighting Russian mercenaries, where we could choose who we want to help before turning on them. Or we could run past them and let them fight it out themselves. Some of my favorite moments in the Halo games are combat arenas with the Covenant and Flood fighting. We could slip on by or take part in the fight, help one side before finishing them off. I wish Cold Fear had more of these situations. Through notes, we could begin to piece together what the exocell are. Those in charge have infected and observed over 300 test subjects: dogs, apes, orcas, and human beings. This whaler ship is a means of picking up test subjects. Heading to the radio room, Tom gets in contact with CIA Special Agent Bennett. This is the man we saw behind the scenes running the disastrous operation during the game's intro. He asks us to find Colonel Yusupov, the survivor on board. Tom and Bennett have some pretty funny bickering moments throughout Cold Fear. They may be on the same side, but they share different goals. An uneasy alliance that neither want to be a part of. Bennett has team die and only has Tom left. Tom is the only one left of his team and would rather be anywhere else.
We've known about that oil rig for a while. It's got some sort of radio fuzzer on it. No transmissions in or out except in a very tight window that we can't get into.
Which means?
Which means that until you take care of that jamming device, I won't be able to help you.
I'm heartbroken.
I'm serious, Hanson. The only way you get off that rig is if I help you, and I can't help you unless I can talk to you. So once you get on board, you smash that jammer, you got it?
Sorry, you're breaking up. I can't hear you.
Hanson! Hanson!
Just kidding. Smash the jammer. Got it. Hanson out.
One thing that's really jarring in Cold Fear is how the game switches to cutscenes. There's no real pause when the game switches to one.
Здравствуйте. Speak English.
While Ubisoft was only the game's publisher, there's something about these cutscenes that remind me of the ones in Splinter Cell. The graphic fidelity, how the character models look, the animations, feel straight out of Splinter Cell. Meeting the Colonel, he's on the cusp of turning into an exocell. He'll tell us to find Anna to get answers. This is the one we heard locked up earlier swearing up a storm. Freeing Anna, she tells us we need to get in contact with her father, Dr. Kamsky, a brilliant scientist brought in to lead research on the exocell. He's on the star of Sakhalin, a nearby oil rig. While drilling for oil, they discovered the exocell. Are they aliens, a surviving dormant species from long ago, sea creatures affected by the dumping of nuclear waste? Despite extensive research, Dr. Kamsky and his team are unsure of their origin. They installed a radio jammer on the oil rig to hide their activities from the outside world. The funding of the research has backing from the Russian mafia. They want to harness the exocell as a weapon, while Dr. Kamsky wants to use it to help mankind. This last bit is a classic sci-fi horror trope. Research into the unknown leading to the opening of Pandora's box. Tom witnesses this firsthand aboard the whaler. Using the radio, Anna can't get into contact with her father, but reaches Pavel, a researcher that works with her father. Anna's father is missing, and he advises us not to come to the oil rig, but Tom and Anna need answers. The whaler ship isn't the game's only location. We have a couple of laps through the ship before a change in location. One that comes at the right time. Uh-oh, are we getting the dreaded escort mission? Yep. Well, it's over before you know it. You can reach the intended destination in a couple of minutes. Along that time, Anna exhibited classic escort AI behavior, bolting ahead of me into oncoming exocells. I know she fits the feisty Russian woman mold to a T, but watch yourself, Anna. Overriding the ship's autopilot, Tom and Anna crash the ship into the star of Sakhalin, the oil rig where the exocell emerged. Anna doesn't quite stick the landing, and Tom dives after her. Unable to find her, he's washed ashore the oil rig unconscious. And here comes trouble. Switching the locale in these kind of games can always be a crapshoot. First stretch tends to be the best, what follows is a drop in quality. I didn't find that quite to be the case in Cold Fear. The game got plenty of mileage out of the ship, and switched at the right time. The rest of the game takes place on the oil rig. There's lots to explore here, plenty of verticality, and easy to gather your bearings. The atmosphere is on point. I found the ship to be the better section, but it's not a large drop in quality between the two. This first stretch on the oil rig is tense. The game stripping away most of our resources and leaving us with next to no health. We have no contact with Bennett, as the radio jammer on the oil rig blocks our signal. It's not a long stretch before we could heal up and replenish our supplies, but a welcome change of tension. Every encounter along the way carries far more weight. Tom runs into Pavel, a researcher along Dr. Kamsky that Anna contacted on the radio earlier. Lucky for us, he has an antidote on hand that prevents us from turning into an exocell. We also get a classic sci-fi horror plot beat. Pavel has something important to tell Tom, but the exocell gets to him first.
Ensign, one more thing. Yeah? You need to...
While we're safe from the infection for now, Tom does get himself into another situation where he's infected yet again. There's a stretch of crossing an outside platform that wouldn't feel out of place in Metal Gear Solid 2. The platform is crawling with laser mines. With the howling wind and rain, it's a bit tricky to determine if we'll avoid a laser or meet our end. At least there's a checkpoint right at the beginning of the section if you die. With the radio jammer destroyed, we resume contact with Bennett from the CIA. He wants us to find Dr. Kamsky's notes so they can ensure something like this never happens again. Tom wants to find Anna, who's still missing. There's an interesting exchange here between Tom and Bennett, giving us some hints about Tom's past. Bennett did some research on Tom in the meantime when we lost communication with him.
It's a good place to start looking for those notes, and you might be able to spot your girlfriend.
She's not my girlfriend.
Oh, that's right, Hanson. You get your girlfriend shot, not eaten by mice.
Back off, Bennett.
Whatever you say.
The manual gives further merit to this, saying Tom was once a hero, now disgraced. We get a cutscene of a large exocell fetching Anna from the ocean. He treats her with care, but leaves her for the exocells to infect her. This is Anna's father, Dr. Kamsky. What happened to him?
Someday, I promise, you will understand.
There's a bit of a twist to one of these sci-fi horror tropes here. Colonel Yusupov brought in Dr. Kamsky to create weapons from the exocell. Dr. Kamsky wants to use them for the betterment of mankind. As research progresses, Dr. Kamsky grows more obsessed with the possibilities the exocell offer. Ones that go far beyond what his employers expect of him, to the point where they're even questioning his methods. We see firsthand how far gone he is with what he's turned himself into. Tom heads off to find another antidote to help Anna. Along the way, we'll come across an elevator platform with 3 large exocells behind glass. An enemy type we haven't come across before. Yeah, you know these are going to pop out at some point. Question is when. It's an area we'll revisit a few times, and there's great tension waiting for them to emerge. I was ready to return to this platform to find one of them missing. This never happens, although they do eventually pop out. They're the classic hulking brood enemy type, charging attacks that are easy to dodge, but pack a punch if hit. They have quite the glaring weak point with their one enlarged arm. Guess they were all left-handed. In Dr. Kamsky's lab, we find an antidote that we could give to Anna. A nice little nod to the James Bond film Goldfinger here.
Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Tom gives the antidote to Anna, but collapses in the process. When Tom awakens, Anna's gone.
So this is it, Tom. 2 patients, 1 cure.
She contacts us over the radio a short time later, in which Tom thanks Anna for saving his life.
Tom, you alright?
Anna, you saved my life.
Just returning the favor.
Thanks all the same.
Wait, did Anna find an antidote and give it to Tom while he was unconscious? Did they have a stretch where we play as Anna to find one, but cut it or ran out of time? It's jarring to say the least. Finding Dr. Kamsky's notes, Tom uploads the antidote data, but nothing else. Bennett wants further data, but Tom refuses. Who knows what the CIA would do with that information, and how far up the chain it would go. Tom has seen firsthand the dangers of the exocell.
I'm on it, Chief. Antidote file is incoming.
Got it. What's next?
Nothing. I'm pulling the plug.
Don't try to be funny, Hansen.
Hey, according to you, that file is all you really need.
You listen good, Hansen. You get that uplink working right now. I want that data.
You want the rest of this? Come get it yourself.
All that's left is to find some C4 to plant in key locations to blow the oil rig sky high. The room containing the C4 is one of the game's funniest moments. Unintentional or not, I'm not sure. The room is full of laser mines and explosive barrels between us and the C4. How much damage could we do to the oil rig with one misplaced shot? Could we even take it down ourselves just with this? Of course, as soon as we pick up the C4, a classic survival horror beat occurs. In comes an enemy. Watch your shots there, Tom. Further adding to the comedy involving C4, you have next to no time upon planning it to run away. This one stretch is one of the few instances where the camera and lack of tank controls create frustration. At least they have the courtesy to put a save point right outside. With all this C4 planted, it's time to blow the oil rig sky high. There's a helicopter that can get us out of here. That said, the pilots are dead. Dr. Kamsky and his growing obsession used anyone and everyone as test subjects. Lucky for us, Anna learned how to fly a chopper to pass the time here. Boy, that's sure convenient. What a go-getter she is.
You learned to fly a chopper?
I had to do something with my time here.
Beautiful. I'm on my way.
Of course, we still have to deal with Anna's father, Dr. Kamsky. He serves as our final obstacle, the game's only boss fight. With how it plays out, the game would have been better off without it. Holding off one final wave of exocell? Sure. A turret section where we shoot Dr. Kamsky from the helicopter? A bit lame and a bit cliche, but anything would have been better than what we got. It very much feels like something thrown together at the last minute. A mandate from on high that the game required. The first phase has us protecting Anna as she plants the remaining charges. We have to distract her father, who charges at us. It always feels like a crapshoot whether he'd hit me or not. Put some distance between you and him, and when he charges, sprint away and pray. If he hits you, pray that you're not sent over the edge. For a second phase, you have to let him grab you, do a QTE, and get a critical hit in. The thing is, it's tough to tell if he's going to grab you or swipe at you. Very much a dice roll and a trial and error affair that left a bad taste in my mouth. Ending the game on a bad note. Well, at least until the credits. Hold that thought for now. It's one of the more annoying, out-of-place final bosses I've dealt with. Tom gets on the chopper and sets off the remaining charges, destroying the oil rig. Anna and Tom fly off into the unknown. What's next for them? Who knows?
It's all right. I'll take care of this.
Papa, I'm sorry.
Goodbye, Papa.
Bennett is none too happy with Tom's actions in destroying Dr. Kamsky's research. I'm sure there's some kind of retaliation coming Tom's way. And while the final boss ended the game on a bad note, the end credits make up for it to a certain extent. The song Use Your Fist and Not Your Mouth by Marilyn Manson plays over the credits. Reminds me how the Thing game from 2002 used a saliva song over the end credits. Here's to hoping the remaster keeps it. What's noteworthy about the song usage is what happens when it ends. You know how it's common for a movie or a game to use a licensed track for the first part of the credits before switching to the movie or game soundtrack after? When Use Your Fist and Not Your Mouth ends, it plays again, and again. About 2.5 times before an abrupt cutoff when the credits end. Why did they do this? Why not switch to a song from the game soundtrack? I'm guessing they wanted to get their money's worth for the rights they paid to use the song. And so ends Cold Fear, one of those perfect Blockbuster weekend rentals from back in the day, or a perfect game to pick up on a Steam sale. One that I hope you get around to instead of letting it linger in your backlog of Steam games you never played. Speaking of Blockbuster, despite the game's low sales, there were talk of a film adaptation. As mentioned, the game hits all the major sci-fi action horror tropes and beats. Ones that won't look out of place on the silver screen. Nothing would ever come of this. What we're left with is a solid 7 out of 10 mid-budget title from what I consider the greatest time frame in gaming. It's a title that fell through the cracks and always living in the shadow of Resident Evil 4. But it's a title that has its own merits and unique ideas. The execution can be lacking in places, but it's a solid experience overall. Despite the studio existing for another 6 years, this would be Darkworks' final release. They worked up on their follow-up title, I Am Alive, for several years before Ubisoft took over the project. Several game pitches never went anywhere, leaving us with only Cold Fear and Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare as the studio's sole releases. It's a shame. I'd love to see what they could have done with better publisher support. Then again, it's also possible publishers drop Darkworks over and over for a reason, but I'm going to give the studio the benefit of the doubt over a game publisher most days of the week. It's possible they were a studio that suffered from the rising costs of game development with the HD era, something that killed off many game studios. But I can now see why Cold Fear is a title I've received many requests to cover. A fun, RE4-like experience before RE4's influence was felt everywhere. There are better titles and experiences out there, but you could also do far worse. Thanks for watching. I'd like to give a special shout out to my top patron and YouTube membership supporters. In the Thank You for Your Patronage tier, American Boot, Tom Terrible. In the Now This Is Boulder Punching tier, Aliatork Satan, Denat Komorova, Ethan, Jamie Plummer, and Samoff. If you'd like to support the channel further, consider joining your fellow Boulder Punchers on Patreon or through a YouTube membership. You'll get early access to videos, featuring the credits, receive periodic updates, other goodies, and my undying gratitude.
Okay, I found the captain. He's a corpsicle. He's a corpsicle. He's a corpsicle. He's a corpsicle. The damn thing's stuck.